Hey guys, settle in, dim the lights a little. Or don't. Your phone screen will dim itself eventually, the way all things do, including empires. Tonight, we're not starting with a war, or a coronation, or a dramatic assassination involving a poisoned ring or a suspicious goblet of wine. No, tonight, we're starting with a clock. A very expensive clock. A clock imported from far away, carried by men who were paid just enough not to ask questions. A clock that worked perfectly. And then, didn't. So get comfortable, let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, because tonight, we're drifting into a palace where time itself seemed to take one look around, sigh deeply, and decide it had better things to do. The Nawab's palace stood on the edge of the river, the way powerful buildings always do. Close enough to the water to feel important. Far enough away not to get damp. From the outside, it was exactly what you'd expect. White walls, tall arches, enough columns to suggest stability, even when none existed. And inside was order, at least on paper. The palace ran on schedules. Prayer times, court sessions, meals, ceremonies, punishments. Everything had its place. Everything had its hour, which is why the clock mattered so much. It was mounted high on the wall of the main hall. Large, round, European, a symbol, really, of modernity. Because nothing says, I am a serious ruler, quite like importing a machine you cannot fix. The Nawab was proud of it. He would gesture toward it during meetings. He would mention it casually, like it was nothing. Oh that, yes, of course, a clock, from Europe, and the courtiers would nod. Because of course they would. They nodded at everything. The clock chimed on the hour. Clean, clear, unapologetically punctual, at first. And then, one day, it stopped. Not dramatically. No sparks. No ominous crack. It just paused. The hands froze somewhere between late morning and early afternoon. An awkward time. The kind of time where no one is entirely sure what they're supposed to be doing anyway. The servants noticed first. They always do. They whispered about it in the corridors. They slowed their steps near the hall. They avoided mentioning it out loud. Because pointing out a problem does not make you helpful. It makes you responsible. The Nawab noticed later. He was sitting beneath it, holding court, listening to complaints about land disputes that had been unresolved since before anyone in the room had been born. He glanced up, frowned, glanced again, and then, very calmly, he asked, has it always been that time? Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the dangerous kind. A courtier laughed nervously. Another coughed. Someone adjusted their sash like it was suddenly too tight. Eventually, someone said it. Very softly, like the clock might hear. It seems to have stopped, Your Excellency. The Nawab stared at the clock. Then he stared at the room. And then, because he was a ruler raised in absolute authority, surrounded by people whose entire survival depended on his mood, he did what made the most sense to him. He declared that the time was still correct. Of course he did, because if the clock said it was that hour, then that hour would simply have to continue. Orders were given, quiet ones. The clock was not to be touched. The clock was not to be discussed. And absolutely no one was to suggest that time had moved on without permission. So the palace adapted. Meals were served according to the frozen hour. Prayers were called at the correct time. Court sessions began when the clock said so, even if the sun was clearly somewhere else entirely. At first, it was manageable. A little confusing, a little embarrassing, but manageable. Days passed, then weeks, and the clock still did not move. Outside the palace walls, the city continued on like normal. Markets opened at dawn. Boats arrived with the tide. Children grew taller. People aged. Inside the palace, though. Inside, it was always the same hour. The Nawab's advisors tried to explain. Gently, carefully, using phrases like, symbolic time, and, external cycles. The Nawab listened, nodded, and then ignored them completely. Because acknowledging the problem would mean admitting the clock was broken. And if the clock was broken, what else was? Better, then, to let time stay politely still. Visitors noticed. Foreign merchants would arrive for meetings and grow increasingly confused. They would glance at the clock, then at the light streaming through the windows, then back at the clock. Some tried to correct it. These people did not return. Others learned quickly. They adjusted their expectations. They conducted business according to palace time, which meant nothing made sense, but everyone pretended it did. And that's how time stopped. Not everywhere, just here. The Nawab aged, of course. He could not stop that. No one can. His beard grew whiter. His steps slowed. His patience thinned. But the clock never changed. It became a feature, a curiosity. New courtiers were warned in hushed tones. Don't look at it too long. Don't ask about it. Just accept the hour. And they did. Because in a system built on obedience, reality is optional. At night, the palace was quiet. Too quiet. Without the rhythm of passing hours, without the reassurance of time moving forward, the halls felt heavy. Stagnant. Like the building itself was holding its breath. The Nawab began to complain of restlessness. Of long days. Of nights that never quite ended. Physicians were called. Astrologers consulted. Charts drawn. They blamed the stars. They blamed the river. They blamed the air. No one blamed the clock. Because clocks do not make mistakes. People do. Eventually, the Nawab died. Peacefully. In his bed. At the exact same hour he had lived under for years. The court announced the time of death according to the palace clock. Naturally, the outside world adjusted. Because it always does. The clock remained. New rulers came and went. Some glanced at it. Some smirked. Some considered fixing it. None did. Because by then, it wasn't just a clock. It was tradition. And traditions are much harder to repair than machinery. So the palace stayed suspended. Not in reality, but in memory. A place where schedules bent. Where authority overruled physics. Where time, for a little while, learned not to argue. And as we drift forward, slowly, gently, away from this riverbank and this frozen hour, let's float over to another royal household. Another elite family. Another group of people who looked at reality, frowned, and decided to do things their own way. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that power doesn't just distort morality. It distorts time itself. And the next ruler we're visiting, well, he had a calendar full of cousins.